Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me virtually today. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the Vaping 101 vaping epidemic right now that we're seeing with youth. This is a guide for educators and parents. We've put together a presentation for all of you to give you a little better understanding on what's going on right now with vaping and what our youth are seeing and a little bit of insight into what's going on. So here we go. First of all, I'd like to start with the very basics here, just to get us all on the same level playing field, just what e-cigarettes are. And before I start, I'd like to mention that I use the words e-cigarettes, vaping, or vapes all synonymously. As you know, typically there's different verbiage all around there that we're seeing youth use. So if you're hearing your students say vaping, they're meaning e-cigarettes, but it's just all over the board there. So just to start out here, we will start with what e-cigarettes comprise of. So all e-cigarettes, as you see here, start with a battery. Whether each e-cigarette looks different in shape, size, color, they all have the same basic components of how they're made. So each battery will be essentially a lithium battery, things like you see in your disposable chargers or your external chargers for your cell phones. Then we have what we call an atomizer coil. This is what heats up really hot within the device, creating what looks like a vapor and aerosol with the liquids that go inside. So with that, there's also an absorbent material or cotton that is used to hold these different e-juices, vape liquids, things of that nature, like the nicotine you see here and others. Now, when you're vaping and you're pulling from this vape here, you just see it pulls all of these chemicals through the atomizer and coil, heating it up super hot to create what looks like a vapor or this big cloud that we're starting to see all around town, in cars, everywhere. So with that being said, there are different components here, and you'll see the different types of e-liquids and vape juices. Over here, your attention on the left, that is a pod. So we see that in, a lot of our non-disposable vape devices. They're pods that you can click in and out that actually hold this nicotine and all the other flavorants and chemicals. Over here, we see different bottles. Those look like eyedroppers or droppers here that go into our larger vape devices. They're called tanks and mods, which I'll show you a little bit later. But those you can control how much liquid you're putting in and have a little bit more control on the product. So why the e-cigarette? A little bit of history here, just to kind of give us an idea of where they started. So back in 2003, the e-cigarette was created with the intent to be a cessation or a quitting device. This was started because a scientist had a father who passed away of smoking issues and thought that there might be a better way to help people quit. So, it's significantly less likely to harm adults. That's what we thought initially. You see here, the Cancer Society mentioned that. Now, the long-term effects, we don't really know much of. Yes, they've been around for, about 17 years so far, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information in the long term of these health effects. So e-cigarettes and vapes. I wanted to give you all a bit of a visual just on what to look for. There's a lot here. Unfortunately, there's a lot more out there, but this is kind of a rough estimate on kind of most of the things that you'll be seeing. So just to get started, I'll show you what we're seeing our youth mainly use is this rechargeable e-cigarette here. That's, the famous Juul. They look like USB devices. They're rechargeable, so you can put in and out of these pods. Now, you do see here the disposable e-cigarette. Not as popular right now, but that's what they looked like when they first came out. So it's pretty obvious they were meant to look like a cigarette. So it was meant for people who were already smoking for a cessation device. Now we are starting to see more disposable e-cigarettes. They do look a lot like the common Juul or rechargeable e-cigarette. As you see here, this puff bar, that's jumping out on the market now as a really affordable disposable e-cigarette. They have a lot of flavors as well, and they're pretty inexpensive, possibly around, $10 a piece. So with that, that is what we're seeing mostly our youth using. However, what I mentioned in the last slide, these large tank and mod devices, as you see here. Those are the big handheld ones that you'll see mainly adults using, as they are a little more expensive. They're customizable, and you can control how much nicotine you're really putting in there. Some people can actually make it to what they'd like. Those are the ones that we're seeing these huge clouds of smoke, when you're walking down the street. come from those types of devices. Now, I will say most of our youth aren't using them. However, there are some out there who are able to get, a hold of these different devices. Typically, they can take them from adults, or if they have an older sibling or a connection, to get them, accessibility here. You can see, over time, a lot of these devices have changed. They're typically meant to be kind of discreet, easily storable. We have the bigger devices, but that's for someone who doesn't typically mind, people seeing them vape. So, all of these, they are meant to kind of be a little bit of a cigarette style. Moving on here, there are some e-cigarettes and vapes that we call stealthy vapes. So we are seeing some of these on the market in order to be a more discreet product. And unfortunately, we are seeing some of our youth having access to these products. So for example, over here on the top left, you see a medical inhaler. That's actually a vape device, unfortunately. We also see, hoodies and sweatshirts now being turned into vaping devices, as you see through the drawstrings. It actually is a device there. This backpack, phone case, there's a lot of devices out there that are meant to look like day-to-day things, just because I truly think that these companies are marketing towards our youth. I always say, if you're an adult and this is legal for you, there's no need to really be hiding it to this extent. So for example, you're seeing these smartwatches, those are becoming a little more common. So my tip is, if your youth, your child has a brand new smartwatch that you didn't buy for them, maybe take a gander at it. Look, maybe it's probably not a vape device, but you do never know. So just kind of keeping an eye out on new devices that your youth are bringing home, especially if they look like a bunch of USB pieces and parts. You never know what it could be. Down here on the bottom right is a key fob. That's actually a vape device. And to be honest, if I didn't know it was a vape device, I would think it's a key fob as well. So, they are getting pretty smart out there with these different types of things marketing to our youth and our young people. So keeping an eye out to see if there are new devices around or new clothing, things like that. So what to watch for a little bit past these devices. This is for, parents and educators. So the main one here that we talk about is sweet or interesting scents, fun flavors. It can smell like lotions or perfumes. The idea of, walking into a Bath and Body Works, they start to smell like that. So just keeping an eye out with these big fun scents or flavors that are out of the norm. Kind of keep your eye if you're smelling it often and in really discreet settings. Also, like I mentioned, unfamiliar USB drives, battery chargers, spare parts, that, is an indicator that there might be a vape device in the home. A lot of youth are really smart on how they're hiding these or keeping pieces apart so you can't tell. So just kind of keep an eye out on all these different and unfamiliar devices. Next, in way of mood, maybe more out of the normal, irritability, restlessness, and sleeplessness. I like to mention here, though, that we do know that our youth are going through a change, especially as teens. So they could be irritable already. But what I like to mention is really pay attention. It might not just be one indicator coming out, but if you're starting to see a few of these come together and you kind of have a list of indicators, maybe checking to see, having a conversation with your youth or your student about vaping, just to kind of see what comes up there. I mentioned before, these sneaky devices, watches, inhalers. This also means that they're finding really great ways of hiding these devices. I have seen hollowed out books, pens or magic markers that have been pulled out with a vape device inside, or different stealthy ways to put it together with your phone cases. So just knowing that it can look like anything, that's not to scare you, but it's just to kind of keep your eye out, because our youth are super clever. Now, in regards to class and maybe actions here. So for educators, if you have a student who's constantly going to the bathroom at the same time every day or every single class, something to keep an eye out. Many students do vape, or many students who vape coordinate with other vapors. So if you're noticing that you have multiple students going to the restroom at the same time, they may be coordinating each day. I've spoken to youth who said that, they'll just go to the restroom and hope someone has a vape and they'll be sharing. It's a very social activity seen by youth. So just kind of keeping an eye on the habits of your students to see kind of what's going on there. Now, inside of the classroom, an idea to keep around is the, sweatshirt, t-shirts, around their face, often pulling it up to, disguise the smoke and vaping vapor that's coming out here. A lot of students will blow into their sweatshirts. They can hide that. There's a thing out there now that they can learn called stealth vaping. So that's just the idea of taking smaller hits so the disbursement of vapor is a lot smaller as they go. So just kind of keeping an eye around, that behavior out of the normal. At home, like I mentioned, these new electronic devices or USB devices, maybe irritability out of the norm, but a big reminder is looking at indicators that there's multiple for one. So if your student is being irritable, that doesn't mean they're vaping, but maybe look at everything else and see if there are more indicators. So just a little bit more about vaping itself, an aerosol versus a water vapor, because there's a lot of misconceptions and miscommunications about what vape devices actually are and e-cigarettes actually produce. Unfortunately, it is not just a water vapor, and that's what a lot of our youth believe. So a water vapor really is just a visible exhalation such as steam or fog. When you're boiling water for pasta, you're seeing that vapor come up, but what it does is it actually disappears completely when it's cooled. So that, goes away, doesn't stick in the air. What e-cigarettes are is they produce, when you're breathing in and breathing out, an aerosol. An aerosol is a mixture of particles suspended in a gas. So instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas, aerosols can leave drops behind. This is something that I share with our youth as well, because I think it's so important to understand that it is a lot more harmful than companies are trying to portray. I believe the use of calling it a vape pen or vaping was a way to kind of pull away from this aerosol. So something that I do mention to you to really put it into perspective so you know what your youth are hearing is that think of Febreze. Febreze is an aerosol. When you're spraying that Febreze in the room, you're not wanting that smell to go away quickly. So you're spraying it hoping that it lasts a long time. So even after all of it has seemingly dispersed in the air, you can't see that aerosol any longer, you're still smelling that. So think of that as that aerosol that you're getting when you're vaping. So when you take a hit from there, that aerosol is going into your lungs and it's cooling down and it's coating the inside of your lungs, leaving these chemicals and metals from the device behind. So then when you're exhaling, you're not getting rid of all of that aerosol and you're actually still dispersing aerosol into the air. So it's a little bit scary, but it's really important for us to understand what an aerosol versus a vapor is. So with that, this is another slide that I show your youth. Like I said, I think it's important for you all to be seeing the same things across the board so you can actually have conversations with your students or your youth on what they're seeing and learning in these presentations. So what is in e-cigarettes and vapes? Yes, I know this list is very long and overwhelming. Unfortunately, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I show a little more zoomed in view here of some of the harmful chemicals that we can kind of understand. So I show this to youth to give them an idea of what these chemicals are also in day-to-day products. So for example, the first one here, arsenic, that's also found in rat poison. So we understand that arsenic is safe in the way it's used in rat poison, obviously not for ingestion, but it's safe for us to touch in that space. However, it is not safe for us to be inhaling, and we unfortunately don't have science on the long-term effects to really show you. So I think that this list is really helpful to understand that the chemicals that are being put in our body through vapes are in all of these toxic chemicals that we would never put into our bodies in real life. So next, a little slightly more of a breakdown to give you an idea of what's different between e-juice, vape juice, and pods. So the e-juice and vape juice, like I mentioned earlier, they come in bottles that kind of look like eyedropper bottles. Those are typically in those larger tanks and mods that hold in your hand that you can apply yourself. Those also do have a much wider range of flavors. However, pods are starting to kind of pick up on their flavors until we started getting these flavor bans. So in e-juice and vape juice, there's propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, flavoring, dieticyl, which is a harmful chemical, but that's actually what gives us those fruit flavors, and then nicotine. This we are finding are still found in bottles that claim that they're 0 milligrams. Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. We're not sure, kind of how they're getting away with that. Now with pods, with what we are typically seeing our youth using, right? And they're included in Juuls, pods also in those disposable e-cigarettes, same chemicals here. So the big outliers for me and differences are nicotine salts. nicotine salts have been discovered over the last few years, and they're used in these pods because they are a lot stronger. And they have a very high nicotine content, and they hit you a lot differently. So with that, we're also adding more chemicals in these pods, like benzoic acid, because that allows for a smoother hit of these nicotine salts. So we're just adding more and more chemicals to make this a more pleasant experience, but these companies aren't paying attention to the long-term effects, obviously. So with that, let's dive a little bit deeper here into nicotine to give you, a really quick rundown and a rough idea of what it specifically does in the brain, especially the youth brain. And when I talk about this, I want you to keep in mind that our brains are not fully developed until at least age 25. So these youth are still in this great time of brain growth. And when they're adding these chemicals, we're seeing these issues. So nicotine, it's a prominent chemical in e-cigarettes. It targets the part of the brain which controls attention, learning, memory, and mood. So nicotine and other chemicals change the way that these synapses in our brain are formed, harming and slowing development within the brain. Synapses are what are sending messages back and forth. As you can see in this, little GIF here, is they're shooting it quickly because that's how you're telling your body what to do, and you're absorbing more and more information and shooting it around. Now, when these synapses are actually hit and targeted by nicotine, we're starting to see the deterioration there. So it's a lot harder to, control attention, learning, mood, and send these messages back and forth. One more thing on nicotine here that's very unfortunate is, so in a standard pack of cigarettes, we know that each cigarette contains about 1 milligram of nicotine. So each pack is about 20 milligrams of nicotine. We have just, found out through Juul and some digging through Stanford, they have discovered that there's about 41 milligrams of nicotine in every single Juul pod. That's 2 packs of cigarettes per pod. Not every youth is going through a pod a day, but we have seen some, and we are having trouble, really tracking how much nicotine is, taken in every, session here. And that's an unfortunate piece with these e-cigarettes when it comes to cessation and quitting, because we can't figure out how much a youth or an adult needs in ways of cessation for nicotine and, say, patches and things like that, because we're not able to understand how much milligrams of nicotine they're going through in every single session. It's a lot harder to count because it can go by so quickly. With that, this is also another slide that I'm showing our youth here. So what happens when we're using? So at the Placer County Office of Education, we are super big on being honest with these students. So nicotine, yes, it does provide a buzz when you're, ingesting. It gives you relaxing feelings. You can feel a little more toned down, help your anxiety. And this is all because it stimulates the release of an excess of dopamine. Dopamine is what we call the feel-good chemical that's in your brain. So when I describe it, you're getting a rush of dopamine when you're having a good time with your friends, you're laughing, or you're eating your favorite ice cream. Dopamine feels good. It has a drive for reward. But the scary piece about dopamine, which I really implement to youth, is that it's associated with memory. Dopamine knows what you're doing and can remember when you're getting that hit. So it sends these signals. So you know that you love that ice cream because it feels great, and you want to go back to that when you need a little bit of that hit of dopamine. But also, it definitely remembers that you were vaping when you got this hit and this rush. And because it's an over excess amount of dopamine, it's a lot harder to get these feelings the longer you use, because you get more and more desensitized to the amount of dopamine that's coming in. So with that, I like to say that that's a really slippery slope to addiction. I tell youth, it's chemicals going on in your brain. So anyone and everyone can get addicted. Addiction does not discriminate on who you are. So it's a really good view on how easy it can happen, and shows, youth that it can happen to anyone. So who is vaping, you may ask? Now, historical stereotypes really don't apply here. We're seeing that it's any kind of youth. I'm not saying all your youth are vaping, but youth from all different groups, backgrounds, levels are vaping. So, for example, it's your straight A students, it's your athletes. Because this isn't, gross old smoking anymore, it's seen as a social act and something fun. So kind of anyone's doing it right Now, why are youth vaping? I think, we understand that, it's adolescent development and our youth right now are in this risk taking stage of life. They're trying to fit in with their friends or finding their groups. They're a little bit of rebellion going on there. And they're trying to individuate and figure out, what they like to do. So, yes, we know that already. But I think something that's super important for our educators, our parents, guardians, everyone to understand is that our youth right now are in such a high state of stress and anxiety and expectations. It's really heartbreaking because when I go do these presentations, I ask you, why are you vaping? And I get plenty of hands that say they're just too stressed out. And I'll be real, it's kind of hard to take a step back and realize, even though they're so young and having fun, that they are going through stress and anxiety. So that has to do when it comes with academic and school, extracurricular sports, arts, anything of that nature. Family and home life are big with anxiety now and peer pressures. So one, it's really easy to start using a vape because it feels good and they know that it's alleviating the stress. But then that's when we see our addiction coming in, and that's what they're using as their coping mechanisms. Now, with peer pressures, I like to also mention, this generation is living in a time of technology and social media. That is how they connect, but that's also how they're being influenced. So, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, things like that, they're seeing influencers, they're seeing their friends, they're seeing people that they look up to, maybe vaping or making bad habits and bad decisions. And social media portrays these unrealistic goals and standards that these things are okay or that every single day you have to be happy. So just paying attention that our youth are growing up in a time of this technology, and that is a humongous factor in their mental health and why they're vaping. So I know this slide is a little bit wordy, but I find it really important as these are first-hand accounts. They come from the New Yorker and different interviews with youth. So I'll go ahead and read it to you briefly. So first is, juuling and scrolling through Instagram offer strikingly similar forms of contemporary pleasure. Both provide stimulus when you're tired and fidgety, and both tend to become mindless ticks that fit neatly into rapidly diminishing amounts of free time. You can take 2 Juul hits and double tap a bunch of pics in about 10 seconds. You need an inefficient 5 minutes to burn a paper tube of tar and leaves into ash. So this is a really big statement on how our youth right now are so living in a time of instant gratification, being able to do things very quickly and getting results fast. So that's why vaping and e-cigarettes have come in, and I really think are connecting to these youth so quickly because, like they've said here, it's so fast to get to the feeling in that dopamine release, just like all of their social media. The next one here, which I think is powerful, is you're expected to Juul, but you're expected to not depend on it. If you're cool, then you Juul with other people and you post about it so everyone will see that you're social and ironic and funny. But if you're addicted, you go off by yourself and Juul because you need it and everyone knows it. So this is a big statement as well on the commonality of vaping and juuling and the expectations among youth right now. So it's seen to be this really cool thing that you vape with your friends and do all of that. But we're seeing that youth are not talking about the addiction piece and quitting and cessation. So you're expected to do this, and then everyone's getting, addicted behind closed doors and don't know how to talk about it. Unfortunately, I've had, youth come up to me and talk to me about how they didn't know they were addicted until they went home for the weekend and didn't have access, and now they don't know how to stop. We have youth coming to us asking for help on how to quit because they know they have a problem and it just started out as something fun and social to do with their friends. So that's something really important that I think as educators and teachers that we need to be talking to our youth and normalizing cessation and normalizing asking for help and creating these safe spaces for our youth so they can come forward because we do know that they're struggling. With that, what do youth know about vaping? So as you see here with this infographic, this was a question that came out, I believe, in 2016. It's a little bit older, but from my firsthand experiences going to schools and asking these same questions, I'm hearing a lot of the same. So as you see here, they were asked, what do teens say in their e-cigarettes? 66% said it was just flavoring and water vapor. And we know based on all the info that I just provided to you that that's not the truth. So we're seeing that our youth, don't know a lot about vaping in general. These companies do not go out and share exactly what's in there and all the health side effects and things because, they want these youth to be using their products. So, many youth believe that they're just inhaling flavors and water vapor when they're really taking in these aerosols. So unfortunately, they're not equipped with the information and education that they need to make the right decisions when it comes to vaping. So another reason why we need to continue to have these open conversations and just educational conversations around, vaping and then other things that they might be doing as well. With that, what are they seeing in the media? This is a huge piece I also share with you to show, hey, Juul's advertisements are these happy young people, maybe they're not teens, but they look like they're having a great time with their friends. This is a positive experience. Over here, the bubblegum flavor, what I always say to youth is, look at the marketing. No one's mom needs a bubblegum or juicy fruit flavor of vaping, right? So it's pretty obvious who they're targeting with these different media campaigns. This is something that I do share. It is a quote from the 80s, but I believe it still rings true with tobacco. Today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer, and the overwhelming majority of smokers first begin to smoke while still in their teens. We do know that that latter fact there is still true, and we see that big tobacco companies are willing to say this out loud. Here, some different types of flavors that are out there. Just a throwback here to what I was mentioning earlier when it comes to tanks and mods, those bigger devices. Those do have, upwards of 15,000 different flavors. We are seeing the pod-based devices or the disposable-based devices have less flavors. So typically these companies only have, a handful or two handfuls of flavors there, but they're still big enough, to reach this market. This is another quote. This was done, in the late 70s, but I do still think it's true. The base of our business is the high school student. I don't think that's changed based on marketing, flavors, accessibility, and where they're marketing to you. With that, I like to show, here's just a grouping of some vape brands here. You do see Juul in this gray one. That's a big one. Vipe, Vooz, that's a big one as well. I like to show that here's some different vape brands. And here are the big tobacco companies that actually own these brands. So Camel, is owning Vooz and Blue here. And we know that big tobacco is bad. That's an undeniable fact. Youth know it. So I like to show them, look at this manipulation. You didn't know that these vape companies here were owned by all of these big tobacco, and big tobacco hasn't changed. So they are hiding behind these vape companies to continue to get more users, because if people continue to quit, they're no longer going to have a market. So there we go. With that, what's happening now? This slide isn't meant to scare you, but it is to kind of show you what's going on. Our former FDA commissioner has said that this is a current public disaster, addiction crisis. The US Surgeon General has said that youth vaping has reached an epidemic level. So we have so many youth out there vaping right now that it's creating this entire public health disaster in the United States. So as of June 1st, there's been nearly 3,000 cases of lung illness and injury directly related to vaping. And that really only goes until about, summer of 2019 is when we really started keeping track of these different illnesses and different cases coming out. Now, I will mention that the information in red also does connect to THC and marijuana vaping. We don't talk a lot about that in our presentations right now, but Stanford has a Stanford Tobacco Toolkit that also has a lot of information on cannabis and THC vaping that you can check out as well, that I'll link in these resources. There has been at least 68 deaths nationwide directly related to vaping. It's hard to say if it was just from tobacco vaping or if it was a combination of THC, tobacco, because a lot of people are actually dual users using both products here. So what's being done? I want to give you a little bit of hope as we get through this presentation. So with federal policy right now, some history here is, so e-cigarettes weren't originally categorized as a tobacco product. So that was a big barrier to prevention because we weren't able to either get the funding and regulation around that or advertising against. And the advertising they were able to do a little bit more because they weren't categorized as tobacco. So From about 2008 to 2016, there were back and forth lawsuits between the FDA and Big Tobacco to try to regulate and get different types of sanctions on these devices. And not until about 2016 did FDA finalize a rule to extend tobacco product regularity authority to e-cigarettes. So they finally became, under a tobacco product. With that being said, that's put a lot of kind of wrenches into the movement here to get regulation, because of most of these companies, unless they were brought in after 2016, are still not FDA regulated. They have until 2021 to let us know everything that's in these products. We're seeing that there's at least 4,000 chemicals in these products, but these companies do not have to tell us everything until 2021. So that's a little bit scary, a little bit of an eye opener of they could be kind of selling us short here. So what's being done in the state policy? So California, a few years ago, the age to purchase any tobacco products shot up to 21. So that was really helpful with e-cigarettes and vaping. In the works right now, there's a lot of bans and policies being put in and being voted on, smoking bans in state parks, different types of advertisement bans, and online e-cigarette sales. So most companies now, you do have to provide that you are 21 and put your ID information, but there's a lot out there that you can purchase by just clicking a box that you're 21 and giving proper credit card information. So they're working really hard right now for there to be more packaging and more regulations around that to ensure that we aren't just having our youth buying online. Local policy, this is kind of within California and within our county. So several cities and counties have banned flavored products. Rockland and Auburn right now are the only cities in Placer County with a tobacco density and zoning policy. So that means that, they're doing social host ordinances and the no new tobacco retailer within 1,000 feet of schools or existing tobacco retailers. So we're trying to make, these different retailers less dense, keep them away from our schools so our students and our youth are seeing less of it. Auburn's working on a comprehensive policy with flavors, social host ordinances, and things of that nature. A little bit tough because we have to do a countywide policy because Placer County is rural. So it's a lot of unincorporated area. Now, what can you do? First of all, don't panic. Not all of our kids, and not even most of our kids are vaping, but we have to pay attention to it at this point because there's enough that this is becoming a crisis. So we need to educate here. So early and often, a lot of people ask, is there a time that's too early to educate? And I don't think so. We're doing presentations from the county here as low as 5th grade, and we're really interested in working on age appropriate programming for younger. I think it's great to start early to talk about the dangers of nicotine and addiction and let kids know that that can happen to anyone. So it's not, too young to start prevention and start talking about these things so they can be equipped down the line to be able to say no and make informed decisions when, they're presented with these products. So also a big one that I think is important for our educators and our parents is remember balance. This is not an us versus them type of thing going on here. Our youth are victims of the tobacco industry. They're being advertised to and they're being sold really clever products out there that taste good and that are really marketed towards them. So we need to understand that it's all of us working against these tobacco companies and also, really talking to your youth about what's going on in their lives. So much of vaping is used as a coping mechanism. So how can we step in there and figure out what's going on? A lot of kids are using this with their stress and anxiety. So seeing how we can get to the root of the issue and not just slap a Band-Aid solution over it. A little bit more of what we can do. Protective factors. So that means, positive school climate, engaging in learning, caring adults, coaches, and mentors around our youth. Give them these protective and trusted factors that they can go to when they're having problems or fall back on as coping mechanisms here so they can feel equipped to say no and make the right decisions. Healthy activity like student campaigns, like we're seeing out there, Jewelers Against Juul, things like that, different peer helpers, wellness clubs, etc. Working with and for our youth to make them equipped and aware of what's going on. Effective interventions, that's huge. So if we have youth who are already vaping and need help, find out why the student's vaping and how we can find a track for cessation or, work on the problem that's triggering this usage. Now, something that we're doing at the County Office of Education is a thing called brief intervention. We're piloting this out to schools right now as a alternative to suspension. So when a student gets caught vaping, they actually come to a series of one-on-one sessions with me to where we really get to the root of the problem and start working on alleviating that struggle so we can work on cessation as we move forward. Lastly, use your voice locally and at the state level. All we can do is use the voices that we were given to demand change and work on creating a safer, healthier community for all of our youth. And so I like to leave you all providing a few quitting resources here. There's an app called Quit Start for iOS and Android. It's an app that you can use. There's texting apps like Smoke Free Text here. There are more, but these are what I'm finding might be a little bit more helpful for our youth in the ways that they, take information and use their devices. So there are more out there. Please feel free to reach out to me for more. And also a quick Google of quitting resources are super helpful because there are hotlines out there. So lastly, thank you so much for staying with me here. I know virtually a platform can be tough, but I appreciate your care and your need to help our youth. So, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ann Ashton. Our info is right here with what you're seeing, what you need, and questions you may have. I love giving these presentations to our educators and parents and also our youth to get some more info out there. So thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Here's a little bit of our references here on what we've used. Please feel free to reach out to me for any further information. Alrighty, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.